Welcome to Peace Conversations from Peace Community of Faith. Peace is a progressive, multi-generational community of faith connected up with the United Methodist Church in Shoreview, Minnesota. I'm glad you're listening to this conversation, and I hope you find it meaningful. This session is the heart of the matter, practice. So I'm interested to see what our folks think about this session and the topic. Anybody got anything they want to share?
Well, it's nice for me to hear a new definition of practice or of loving God through practice, because growing up and into my adult life, loving God was hard for me to do. I didn't know exactly how to do it, and nobody said this is how you do it. You love others, you spend time in meditation. It was love God, and not having much love in my family, I didn't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the other thing is when you say love something, what is it you're talking about loving? And so when you talk about a person, you have connection. And most people I know have almost no connection with God. They talk about loving God. They talk about God loving them. God loves you this. God loves you that. But do they love God? And the Borg talks about that a little bit too. And my thought on that is, you can't, to love God, or even the practice is to know. Okay, it's not know of, it's to know. And there's a big difference there. When somebody tells you about something, you've heard of it. So you may have been riding in everybody's cars, but if you got behind the wheel, you might not know what to do if you've never driven before. I remember with my daughter, she was very good driver sitting behind in the back seat, till she started to learn, and then you put her behind the wheel, and the whole world changed, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a difference between knowing of and knowing. And a lot of people have a thought or an image that they're connecting with, and they're talking about that. I think to know is what the practice is about, and is something that we learn and know. It's not something you can describe. Like so many things we learn, how do you ride a bike? How do you drive a car? How do you do this or that? You've learned it. You've gotten connection with it. It's taken time for you to know it. There's so much about things that you know beyond what you could even describe a lot of times. Certainly, like I say, a thing like driving. Well, I think getting to know God is similar to that, because it's a very dynamic. It's what's at our core. And the meditation and other ways of getting to know, to being open, that will surface in us. That spirit wants to come out. It wants to be known. And another thing he talked about was your larger self and your smaller self. And my feeling on that always was, you have to let go of the smaller self to be able to know the larger self. And the larger self is one that is immersed in that God energy. And to know that and to feel it, you have to let go of the other one. And Jesus mentioned that a number of times too. So those are just some thoughts. The practice, you're trying to get to know something. If you're just talking about God in the words and as a thing that people talk about without ever experiencing, then you don't know it. And to say God loves you means kind of nothing. Because one thing there, you keep referring to that way is if God's a person, and he starts doing that sometimes too, talking about praying for intercedents and stuff like that. Well, God isn't a person. There are people in spirit form in our lives, and sometimes they reach out and help. I've been helped several times. Often they're family members, sometimes not. But they've helped out, and I've known, but they're not God. They're just how we all help each other in different ways. God is as much the mechanism that all this is through. It's kind of like the soup we live in. It's The tremendous opening, enlightening, connecting thing that you might call love brings things together, but it's not the romantic love. It's the magnetism that holds everything together. And that is far beyond, and to get to know it, there's no description of it. It's something that you know, and you know through practice. That's why people spend so much time, I think, in different groups, meditation and chants and things like that, to try to get to a place where you're finding that spiritual connection, to get rid of the small self so that the big self can emerge. Some of my thoughts. I kind of covered a number of things that he talked about there.
Yeah.
Whether it's the practice, but my thought is to get to know, not know of, but know. And the difference is my analogy was driving a car. You can watch somebody drive a car, but until you get behind the field, you don't know it. And and that's the same thing with our own selves. You explore that, and part of it is what we're doing right now, is to dig into it and discuss it, so that in your day, different things maybe can get stirred up.
Okay.
For me, Lisa, did you want to say something?
Sure. Yeah.
Before I respond?
Yeah, I think I liked a lot of different areas that he talked about in this chapter, and for me, he didn't say it this way, but for me, it's getting rid of the internal chatter so that there is a channel open, I guess, because when our internal voices keep going, and it's just kind of drowns out that connection, I think. So I think that's the hard part, and that's what takes practice, and that's through either meditation or something else, maybe a chant or something that kind of calms down the brain and the internal chatter enough to find the other God connection.
For me, knowing is trusting. The more I know God, the more I can trust him. And again, growing up, there was nobody I could trust. And I didn't know the words at the time, but I couldn't trust anybody I lived with. So it was difficult, well, it was impossible then for me to transfer that feeling of trust to trusting God. And as much as I wanted God to take me out of that environment, and he didn't, the less I could trust him either. So to me, it's trusting.
Okay.
It's hard to do if you don't see it modeled.
Yeah. And I think maybe part of a healthy practice is not only what we do individually, but there are also those collective practices we do together, like peace conversations. Can be thought of as a spiritual practice, where hopefully we begin to understand trust and knowing in a deeper way. Right.
Try to make it one of those thin places where you begin to connect.
So in spiritual practice, I think, the knowing Chuck is talking about is that sense of intimacy.
Right.
The more you drive a car, the more you become aware of how to drive a car, the better you can drive. It would be a good thing if you're better driving a car 5 years down the road, so to speak, than where you are the second day you drive. So there's also, I think, in spiritual practice, a ongoing sense that to participate in spiritual practice on a regular basis will take us deeper and broader into loving ourselves, loving our neighbor, and loving God.
In yoga, yoga, we call it muscle memory.
Yeah.
The more you do something, the more automatic it becomes.
And, you know, and when I play sports, we call it being in the zone.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and it can come in and out. I mean, you can
Yeah.
have your days when it's working and days when it's not. You're making that connection. And, you know, it's just, you don't know, I mean, how things are going to connect through. It's, an example happened in this last week. You know, Cody, our dog, has epilepsy. And so he hadn't had seizures in about 3 weeks. So I knew that one was due. Well, we had a cluster. One was at night and one was the next evening, you know, over 24 hours. But one of them was during the day, and it was mid-morning. Lisa and I were sitting in the living room reading the paper, and Cody was outside. I can't hear anything outside, and there's not a lot of noise with it.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden, I sat up straight. I got to find Cody right now. He's in trouble. And the seizure, when I found out the window, he was around the side of the house. He was on a hill sliding down into the bushes, kind of in the seizure on the hill. It's just the movement that's going to take him down the hill. And yeah, it just kicked off. Now, the connection that made me sit up and say, I got to look for Cody right now, is part of what we're talking about here. It's just a little piece of it, but it's that connection that has no time, has no distance.
Mm-hmm.
It's there.
Yeah.
And Lisa's sitting in the room at the same time. She didn't see it. She didn't hear it. All right. But there's times when she said something, got something right now, and I don't know why. I just got it, you know, and I said, okay, because I don't always, I'm not the one to always hear. Sometimes when I hear it, I know I recognize it and I know I got to do something. But sometimes it's somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to say, I'm with you. Just let me know what to do. Because, you know, you just learn it. When I see that light go on, it might not have been my light, but,
Yeah.
but there's a connection just how it got made, right?
Like an intuition, some kind
Right.
of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, you can call it that because you don't know where it comes from. You know, it's kind of like there's a connection made. And what is that connection and how do we explore that? And it's like Lisa said, you know, shutting off the chatter. You know, you practice, you get quiet, you use your ears, you different techniques to begin to make that connection. And that's all practice. Like I say, asking for intercession in prayer. I think of that as prayer. Right? When I go for a walk, just listening and letting the eyes, without describing the world, observe the world, and using my ears first helps me do that. And feeling the ground under my feet, and feeling everything else all of a sudden that was just taken for granted. And that to me is also connecting and is you know, a form of prayer. When people are what we used to say, because I grew up in the Catholic Church and they spoke Latin for the first many years of my life. You just say the hominy momities, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of chat, a lot of stuff going on, and people are answering stuff. Nobody has a clue what they're saying, and they're you know, it's like what, you know, where are we going with this? You know. But anyway, it's just asking for intercession like that. Now you're talking to a person and you're putting God on your level. And I think the idea is to find the level God's on and try to join that, which is far away from anything that we do in our daily course of business and stuff. So anyway, I just I think that part of what you talked about with prayer got off track, but the rest of it, when you talk about the practice and recognizing, you got later into social injustice, which is seeing that humanity, seeing that spark of the divine in every person. And what was the term that he used there? That yeah, the egalitarian, seeing everything as everybody on the same level and with equal opportunity, equal rights, and you start seeing yourself and others, you're starting to make that connection. You know, it doesn't turn litmus paper or any color. It just something inside you. Something feels right.
Yeah.
Because when that connection's made, something feels right. I just don't know how else to put it, but anyway.
Huh.
I'll bow back.
So I have some difficulty with the idea of unanswered prayer. That is, sometimes it feels to me, or it seems to me, or I'm pretty certain that a prayer has been answered one way or the other. And generally I'd say I probably stop praying when it's answered to my happiness. And if not, I probably then keep praying for an answer that would meet my happiness. The idea of the randomness of prayer confuses me in kind of how to think about it. And in my mind, the idea of answers being random says that God is not there's no rhyme or reason to what's happening. I don't like that. I want a God who's stable. We've got the universe in motion. We've got days and nights and seasons. It feels pretty stable, except for global warming, et cetera, which is human beings, not God. But the idea of unanswered prayer confuses me. And I don't like it.
Yeah. Let me
Well, back
take
to what I
a
said.
shot if I can. Chuck, you want to
I
chime in here?
I just quickly say it goes back to what I said a minute ago. God's not a person that's there to intercede. God is a mechanism that we use more or less as part of our environment, and the energy that connects us all. God's not a person, and that idea that the churches have brought about, that start talking about God as a person, I think is very confusing and leads people down a path that's hard to come back from, because so I just think that that's one of the things right there when you're looking for prayers of intercession. I'm not talking to God per se. You may be talking to some friends that are in between, or in a spirit form that sometimes hang out and help us out in various ways. But when we talk about God, like I say, if we stop thinking of God as a person and start looking for the God, which is much more powerful than any person or any group of people, then we get humbled and almost awe. That's where the awe, you just when you experience any piece of peace, it's just awe-inspiring with no words. And that's the only way I can describe the feelings I've had when I've been close. I had feelings of real thin spots that take me very close. And but that tells me that all the stuff that I might be asking for in my little life is not what God is about. Those are things for me to work on. But asking, helping for clarity and stuff, a lot of times I'm asking friends. I've had people that I had good, one of my aunts that got Lisa and I together, after she died. She got us together. It was her voice. Everything was right on. It was just, I had to laugh. I said, okay, I'm going with you because I don't know, I don't know what's going on here. And I'll go with the flow. And I ended up getting connected with Lisa. And so I look up when I get those things, like you say, when they get answered. I don't just stop. I look up and it's always, thanks. I appreciate that. Somebody reached down and helped me out. I'm not going to call it God. I see there's a lot of things, there's a lot of mechanisms in this world that are not to the all-encompassing level of God. But I say I take God out of the equation of being a person, and then things start to fit a whole lot better.
Well, and I'm not saying God is a person, but the result is the same. It's either answered prayer or unanswered prayer.
Well, and let me take a stab at it. One of the things that Marcus Borg has talked about is oftentimes in faith formation and development, moving from kind of a traditional faith to a progressive faith. There's much to unlearn as well as learn.
Mhm.
So if we think of God in the traditional sense of the Trinity, clearly it talks about God in the sense of three persons or three personas. And even though, you know, I don't think about that so much, that is deep in my soul, unconsciously and subconsciously, that's still affecting me. There is the sense that when I was taught to pray, I pray to God who is the divine, all purposeful, all knowing, all powerful,
Mhm.
right? Those are some of the alls. We talk about God being all, but it's a divine being who is all of those.
Mhm.
And if I pray in the name of Jesus, Jesus will intercede for me and God will hear my prayer.
Mhm.
That's how I learned how to pray.
Mm.
And even unknowingly, even in our vocabulary that we use, and Sharon, you probably didn't notice that, but that was the kind of vocabulary you were using when you were talking,
Mhm.
you know, and we do that unknowingly.
Mhm.
And so it's that deep inner sense in ourselves that still connects God up as an all-powerful being who will intercede on our behalf.
Mhm.
Therefore, prayer becomes God hears my prayer and intercedes for me sometimes and sometimes not.
Mhm.
Then God becomes a very fickle God,
Mhm.
right? You never know. Probably similar to a parent who you never know how they're going to react to you, which is part of the development. Are parents trustworthy or not? Because you never
Right.
know. You
Right.
never know. You know, I know people whose parents, they don't know if they're going to give them a hug or punish them for what they do. And one time they may punish them for the exact same thing. Next time they'll give them a hug for
Right.
it, right? As I think, at least as I have developed, right? We're talking about spiritual practices and how they help our faith develop. That's one of the important things. To transition from God as an all-powerful being who will at some whim will intervene for me or not, to a God who is spirit that is moving within my life, within the life of my friends, within the life I see around me, intentionally to nourish, create, redeem, sustain life. And when I am praying to the God who is the spirit of life, whose whole intent is to create, redeem, and sustain life, no matter if what I pray for is answered or not, as long as I am spiritually connected, that's what we're talking about. Spiritual practice are a way to be connected to God. As long as I am spiritually connected and I have, you know, Chuck talked about this, knowing this intimacy, that God is fundamentally the spirit that moves in me, that always wants me to have life. Sometimes that life is hard, sometimes that life is joyful. For some of my friends, that life includes cancer. That life includes extreme periods of pain. For friends, it involves dealing with the trauma of war. But that God is always there to nurture our lives. And if that is our fundamental stance, okay, God is not an all-powerful being that will be, and we are at God's whim. That's one way to see prayer. But if prayer is intimately connecting with that spirit that wants to create, redeem, and sustain life, then prayer becomes something different. So I may daily pray that we will, in a healthy, creative, nurturing way, deal with global climate change. That doesn't mean that our world leaders are going to deal with climate change in a nurturing, healthy, life-giving way. But that doesn't mean I should stop praying for it either. But sometimes you just pray, and sometimes what happens is not what you want. But you don't stop praying for it.
I find the connection with God has more to do with how I relate to situations and environment, not whether they occur or not.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got places like Tigray and, and Ethiopia and all the hell that's going on over there. I mean, there's a lot of praying going on. The connection with God has more to do with how you handle what you're involved, what you're into, and it does affect your decision making, but it does affect others around you. But your connection with God affects how you relate to things, not whether they happen or not.
So one of the prayers, or one of the sentences we have in our prayers we do at Peace every week, as we're praying, there's a sentence that says, use our prayers to transform us.
I think that's the right line.
Okay.
And I was thinking too that when you're praying for insight, I guess, to how I can better respond or act or whatever. I don't know that praying for somebody else to do something is useful or effective, but praying for insight for my own actions and reactions.
And sometimes that prayer is not just asking somebody to give me insight, but the prayer is actually quieting down the noise to try to connect inside. So that's the act of trying to connect and to practice that in situations itself is prayer, and it's going to change how you deal with things. So it's not somebody help me be clear, because I've find myself going there and realize no, the prayer should be me trying to make that connection and change and think of what is the right thing to do here from a different perspective. First, I have to let go of the little self for a while so that the other self bigger self can emerge a little bit. And then some insight may help me there. But if I just fight it at a physical level with all the surface little self thoughts, you just get in trouble. Or it just makes, it's just grunt work going through. But to be able to find the bigger self, I can put events in life in perspective, and I have much more strength to deal with them. In a healthy way.
I think when you're in horrible pain, You can barely leave the house. You're on heavy duty drugs.
Mhm.
You can barely breathe. Your breath is shallow. You know
Mhm.
your muscles are atrophying because you
Mhm.
can't walk anywhere.
Mhm.
It's difficult. It's difficult.
It,
Yes.
and we should not underestimate that, should we, Sharon?
No.
No.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Also, I think the most important time to let go and to try to reach down to find the other self. It's a hard time, but it's the most important time.
Um,
Might send her some,
Okay, I'm back.
it's
There you
good to
go.
for
see
you.
back.
I'm gonna try and get angry because then I can do it. If
Yeah.
I get sweet and kind, I'll cry. I need to get angry.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Well,
Use it
and
as a tool.
Have you used any guided meditations?
Yeah, I've tried. Let me tell you, the only reason I can say what I just said was
Mhm.
because I've moved some and I am feeling better. I'm not wonderful, but it's
No.
way better than what it was. I can
Yeah.
breathe again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's slowly getting better. My brain, yeah, it's been difficult. This is what I really think. Until you experience something, whatever that is, not necessarily what I've experienced, until you experience something, you can talk about it, but you don't know it. You don't know it.
Very
And I
true.
say that with a lot of anger in my voice.
I hear it.
So I
Yeah.
can stay
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. And
Okay, now I'll try and get sweet again.
no, I think if I could have changed one chapter heading that is the basis for our sessions, I would have talked about spiritual practice.
Hmm.
Because what we're really talking about is anything we do that nourishes our life is a healthy practice. Okay.
Mhm, mhm.
And so just being able to participate in peace conversations can be a spiritual practice if it nurtures our lives, right? Having a cup of coffee in the morning. I mean, it's not unusual for me to do what I call my coffee practice. When I'm alone, I pour myself a cup of coffee and I just remind myself how much joy I have in drinking coffee and how that nurtures my life. But also there is that balance that there's a certain amount of coffee that is good to drink. If I drink too much coffee, that is not necessarily healthy. So it all has to do with finding that balance
Mhm.
of nurturing our lives. And one of the interesting things that I thought about as I was preparing for this is within the Christian tradition, we break the year into different portions. The longest portion of the Christian year is called Pentecost, but it has another name too. It's called ordinary time. And we ought to think of the ordinary things in our lives that are harmful for us that are harmful for me, so that I can work on having them become less harmful. And I should look at the things that really nurture my life and continue to emphasize them, so I can become healthier. So there's all this stuff, particularly from my background, that I just carry around with me that's not too good for me. And it's never going to go away because it's part of who I am. But I can learn to feed that less and feed those parts of who I am that nurture me more.
Yes.
And that is spiritual practice,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and when I started, whenever that was, I was totally in my in my head, totally.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm able to move down into my heart. That's a huge change for me.
Yeah.
So I see that as progress.
Yes. And so I know for months, Sharon, that you have been in significant pain. The prayer to be relieved of that pain is one ongoing prayer.
Yeah.
So it is not like a prayer has a fixed place and time. Many of our prayers are ongoing prayers.
Mhm.
And it's when we stop praying for a healthy climate for our children and grandchildren, great grandchildren to live in, because we're in such despair.
Mhm.
I just can no longer, even think about that, because I'm in such despair that we will never move out of this period of, like an apocalypse. We are doomed for the rest of humanity's existence to just keep going down the road of apocalypse till we disappear.
Mhm.
That's one way to see things.
Mhm.
It's not a very good spiritual practice, I don't think.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a lot of things, like civil rights and treating each other
Mm-hmm.
equitably, that it's an ongoing thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something that will ever be
Yep.
gone.
So I sometimes our most important prayers are prayers that may never be answered, even in our lifetimes. So in that sense, sometimes it's just as important for prayer to fail and keep praying, because then it leads us to be those agents of change that we talked about at the beginning of our time together.
When we talk about, what we talked about today, practice and being mindful, and we are, one body in Christ, and all these terms. When I think about the Bible, I don't see where all that was emphasized. And that makes me wonder if part of the reason we got off track, or churches got off track, is because I don't think it's emphasized in the Bible. I haven't thought about this a great deal, so I'm not saying it very well.
Well, and let me phrase it differently, just a little bit. There is a lot of life messiness in the Bible. The reality of how harmful life can be and how harmful we can be to one another. That can reflect the reality we live in today. So in that sense, the Bible reflects the reality of what it means to live in a world that is harmful. I always wonder how good we who are professional religious leaders or churches that are officially organized have talked about God in the midst of that as constantly trying to bring about well-being and healing, when it seems too much clergy and churches have emphasized the world is harmful. We have the answer. And if you believe what we do, and you do not believe what other Christians, denominations believe, or other religions, then even though the world is really painful, in the end, you get to go to heaven, which is just as harmful. Okay, that's part of the problem. That's not the solution. I think looking at the reality in the world that we live in, to look for God is to look for the places where healing and life are coming, even in the midst of all that pain and harm we live in. You know, even with all the Agent Orange we dropped in Vietnam, you know, the vegetation will come back. Okay, it will not go away, because life is just that powerful. And we often forget that. And spiritual practice is about connecting with that powerful spirit. Now, we know inevitably we are finite. And eventually that pain and harm is going to get us as individuals. But in the meantime, I'm just going to really enjoy life and the power of life up till the very end. And I think that is the type of practice that can nourish us, rather than a supra-human being that is all powerful and all knowing and scares the bejeebers out of me, because I never know how that divine being is going to react to me. I might as well just be an ant that he could accidentally step on. And my life would be crushed. So practice always has to do, I think, with what nourishes life. A healthy spiritual practice always is about what nourishes our life. And I think people have a sense of that. And if a traditional Christian experience nurtures their life, that's where they go. If people are leaving behind a traditional sense of Christianity, they'll look for something like peace, or they will just leave altogether and discover different ways that their life will be nourished. So that's my spiel for the time. So thank you.
Another
Yeah.
at the end of this chapter, talks about practicing compassion and justice,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was good too, and the role of charity and how we should be mindful of where our charity goes, not just for helping people, like feeding people and stuff, but to work for justice. So
Mhm.
part of our charitable giving or our charitable time should be actually
Mhm.
changing the systems that are in place that keep those things going.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. I like that.
That is an important reminder for us. Our spiritual practice has justice and compassion consequences. Yep. Anybody else have any other thoughts before we sign off here?
No, it runs through my mind, probably being single and, fairly frugal. I'm always thrilled that I think about the least footprint
Mm-hmm.
of anybody I know.
Yeah.
And so that makes me happy that
Mhm.
I'm not contributing a great deal to, global warming, et cetera.
Mhm. Yeah, as an individual.
Yeah, the one thing though that I do is when I drink a cup of Caribou, for example, it's not the cup, and yet it is, but apparently the plastic lid, that's plastic, and plastic is a killer.
Now, we live in a reality that we're all doing the best we can. And our lives are slowly changing. So I think prayer is ongoing. Caribou, Starbucks, all those coffee companies, many of the car companies are what now do we need to do so that 20, 30, 40 years down the road, we still have a climate that people around the world can live in.
Mhm.
And I think it will go a lot slower than we'd like it to. And I think we just keep praying that leads us to acts of compassion and justice,
Mhm.
around global climate change and many other issues. Yeah. Well, are we ready to roll? Anybody else have anything spinning around in your brains?
No, I think we talked about it.
Okay, going once, going twice. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. I hope
Thank
you have a
you.
good rest of the day.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.